The champagne glass in Lyra Hendrick's hand felt like it weighed 50 pounds. She stood at the edge of the private balcony, overlooking the main dining room of Auberge Soleil, one of those restaurants where the lighting is always amber and the silence between tables feels deliberate, expensive, curated. Below her, 32 floors of Chicago glittered in the November cold. Inside, her husband was laughing, not the careful laugh he used at client dinners, the real one, the one she hadn't heard in almost 2 years. He was speaking Korean. Fast, easy, comfortable Korean. The kind you only get after years of practice or years of intimacy. And Lyra understood every single word. Her name was Lyra Song before she became Lyra Hendrick. She had grown up between Seoul and Seattle, raised by a Korean mother who refused to let her forget the language, even when the other kids at Jefferson Elementary made fun of her lunchbox. She had studied East Asian business at Northwestern, spent a year interning at a trading firm in Busan, and spoken Korean almost daily until she married Caleb and slowly, quietly, let that part of herself fade into the background of his life. Caleb had never asked about her background, not really. He knew she was half Korean the way he knew she preferred sparkling water to still. A fact, filed away, never examined. He was speaking now to a man Lyra recognized, Jun-Ho Park, a senior partner from the Seoul office of Prescott Capital, the firm that had been circling Caleb's company for 6 months. The dinner was supposed to be a preliminary meeting. Lyra had been invited as the gracious wife, the finishing touch on the image of a stable, trustworthy CEO. She had arrived early and stepped onto the balcony for air. She hadn't planned to overhear anything. She has no idea about any of it, Caleb said in Korean, leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who believed himself unobserved. She's decorative, genuinely. I mean that kindly. She volunteers, she attends events, she looks beautiful in photographs. But she's not, he paused, search for the word, involved, in anything real. Jun-Ho Park said something politely neutral. Caleb smiled. The other situation is fine. 3 years, she understands discretion. And once this deal closes, once the merger goes through, I'll have more flexibility. He tilted his glass. A man in my position can't afford to be complicated before a major transaction. You understand? Jun-Ho Park nodded slowly. His expression was carefully blank. Lyra set her champagne glass down on the balcony railing with both hands, slowly, precisely. She needed her hands to be occupied or they would shake. 3 years, not an affair, a parallel life, conducted for 3 of the 6 years of her marriage. And he had sat across from her at dinner. Their dinner table, the one she had found at an estate sale in Evanston and refinished herself, 3 times a week, sometimes 4, and said I love you the way people say have a good day. Automated, reflexive, meaning nothing. She picked up her glass again and walked back inside. She sat down at the table 2 minutes before Caleb returned from the restroom, smoothing his jacket. He looked at her with the fond, slightly absent expression she now understood completely. Sorry about that. Jun-Ho's been stuck on the quarterly projections. Boring stuff. He reached over and touched her hand once, the kind of touch that communicates nothing. You holding up okay? I'm wonderful, Lyra said, and smiled at him, and in Korean so quietly it barely disturbed the air between them, added, I understand everything you said. He didn't hear her. He was already turning back toward Jun-Ho Park. She filed that away too. The drive home was 40 minutes through the city. Caleb was on his phone the entire time, texting with the glow of the screen lighting up his face in intervals. Lyra watched the streetlights move across the window and thought about the prenuptial agreement they had signed 8 days before their wedding. Her father had reviewed it. Her father, Raymond Song, who had been a contracts attorney for 27 years, and who had specifically told her, Lyra, Clause 11, read Clause 11. She had read it and then, at 29 and in love and certain that prenuptial agreements were formalities for other people's marriages, had signed it without asking him to fight any of the terms. Clause 11. Marital misconduct renders all asset separation provisions null and void. She thought about her father's voice when he told her that. She thought about how she had hugged him at the reception and whispered, Thank you, Appa, not fully knowing what she was thanking him for. Now she knew. She didn't go to her college roommate's apartment that night. She didn't call anyone. She went to bed at 11 and lay in the dark while Caleb slept beside her, and she made a list in her head. What she knew, what she needed to prove, what she was going to do. She wasn't angry yet. Anger would come. Right now she felt the way she always felt before a difficult negotiation. Still, clear, and already 3 moves ahead. Her roommate from Northwestern was a woman named Philippa Chow. Philippa was now a family law attorney in the loop with a reputation for being methodical and unkind to opposing counsel. Lyra texted her at 7 the next morning. I need to talk to you, not as friends, as client and attorney. Philippa called back in 4 minutes. Tell me everything, Philippa said, and Lyra did. There was a silence after she finished. The Korean, Philippa said finally. He genuinely doesn't know. He has never once in 6 years asked about my mother's family or what language we spoke at home. He knows I'm half Korean the way he knows our zip code. It's on the paperwork. Okay. Lyra could hear Philippa writing. The prenup clause your father's doing? Bless that man. Here's what we're going to need. Documentation of the affair. Not assumption. Documentation. Texts, emails, hotel records, anything with dates. Do you have access to his accounts? He gave me his email password 2 years ago to handle some travel arrangements. He never changed it. Have you accessed it since? No, don't yet. Not until I tell you to. I want everything done cleanly. Any evidence collected improperly gives his lawyers room to move. Philippa paused. Lyra, his company. The Prescott Capital merger, how far along is it? 6 months out, minimum. Maybe 8, then we have time. And time is what I want. Can you hold this together for 6 months? Lyra thought about sitting across from Caleb at dinner. About smiling at his business associates. About attending the holiday party at Hendrick Capital in 3 weeks and shaking hands with everyone and being the gracious, uncomplicated wife. Yes, she said. Good, because the difference between moving now and moving at the right time could be the difference between a settlement that covers your legal fees and one that changes the rest of your life. Lyra moved carefully, methodically, the way her father had taught her to play chess. Not by chasing your opponent's pieces but by building a position so strong that by the time they noticed it, the game was already over. She began with what she could access openly and legally. Their joint accounts. The investment portfolio she had co-signed on during the first year of their marriage. She had contributed $40,000 of her own savings to a fund that Caleb had called Our Future. She had also, she now recalled, co-signed the initial LLC formation for Hendrick Capital 8 months before their wedding, when Caleb was still raising seed funding and needed a second name on the documents to satisfy a compliance requirement. She had done it as a gesture. He had framed it as a formality. Her name was still on the original formation documents, which meant she was technically a founding member of a company. Currently valued at approximately $60 million. She found this out on a Tuesday evening in December, alone in Caleb's home office, while he was at what he called a late client dinner. She photographed every document in the filing drawer. She photographed the formation papers, the original investment memos, the operating agreement. Then she created a private email account and sent everything to herself and to Philippa. Philippa called the next morning. Lyra. A pause. Do you know what this means? Tell me in your language. It means that, depending on how we argue it, your stake in the founding of Hendrick Capital could be worth somewhere between $8 and $14 million. That's before we even touch the marital assets. The number sat in the air between them. And with the prenup clause? Lyra said. Void. If we prove misconduct, the prenup is void and we add half the marital estate on top. We're potentially talking about a total claim in the 20 to 25 million range. Lyra was quiet for a moment. How do we prove the misconduct? That, Philippa said, is the next step. She found the name before she found the proof. It surfaced in Caleb's calendar, which synced automatically to the shared family iPad they kept in the kitchen for grocery lists and weekend schedules. The calendar was filtered to show only their shared events, but one evening in January the filter failed. A software update, a glitch, something mundane, and Lyra set down her coffee and looked at 5 months of unshared appointments. The name appeared regularly. Tuesday evenings, some Saturday afternoons, occasionally Sunday mornings, which was when Caleb said he was at the gym. Audrey Slate. Lyra looked her up. Audrey Slate was 31, a VP at a commercial real estate firm downtown, and her LinkedIn photo showed a woman with direct eyes and the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted she belonged in any room she entered. She was accomplished. Lyra could see that clearly, and she felt no contempt for it. She felt, if anything, a cold clarity about the kind of man who would have both of them and think himself entitled to both. She photographed the calendar. She documented 15 appointments over 5 months. She sent everything to Philippa with a note that said, I have a name. What's next? Philippa hired a licensed investigator, a former federal agent named Gus Tran, who worked out of a one-room office in Wicker Park and communicated almost exclusively in brief, precise sentences. Within 2 weeks, Gus had confirmed 3 separate instances of Caleb meeting Audrey Slate at a hotel in the River North neighborhood. Documented with receipts charged to a business credit card Lyra hadn't known existed. The credit card was in the name of a subsidiary of Hendrick Capital that Caleb had apparently created for purposes Philippa described as creatively irregular. A forensic accountant named Sylvia Oduya reviewed the subsidiary's records and called Philippa on a Friday afternoon with findings that neither of them had fully anticipated. He's been running personal expenses through the subsidiary for approximately 4 years, Sylvia said. Hotel stays, jewelry purchases, a leased vehicle registered to the LLC. We're looking at roughly $380,000 in commingled funds. That's a problem for his business partners. It may also be a problem for the SEC. The number landed with weight. Philippa relayed this to Lyra over coffee in her office, a glass-walled room with a view of the river. Does he know we know? Lyra asked. Not unless you've told him. I haven't said a word. Then he still thinks this is a stable marriage and an uncomplicated merger. Philippa set down her cup, which means we hold. We do not move until the merger announcement. The moment Prescott Capital files the public partnership documents, everything becomes a matter of public record. At that point, his financial behavior, the subsidiary, the commingled funds, all of it becomes visible to anyone who looks. We file for divorce the same week. His leverage disappears. How long? 8 weeks, maybe 10. 10 weeks of breakfast together. 10 weeks of asking how his day was and hearing half answers. 10 weeks of watching him text someone from across the living room couch and pretending not to notice the small, unconscious smile he got when he read her reply. Fine, Lyra said. 10 weeks. She spent those 10 weeks building something. She had a business administration degree from Northwestern that she had never fully used. During her marriage, she had channeled her skills into Caleb's world, managing his household, organizing his client events, handling correspondence he didn't have time for. She had made herself useful in ways that were invisible, and he had allowed himself to not see them. She began drafting a business plan for a consulting practice. Corporate communications and cross-cultural strategy, specifically for American companies entering Asian markets. She had the language skills, the academic background, the network from her years at the trading firm in Busan, and 6 years of watching how a CEO communicated, and miscommunicated, with international partners. She worked on the plan in the early mornings before Caleb was awake, on her personal laptop, in the kitchen with coffee, the city still dark outside the window. She built financial projections. She reached out quietly to former contacts in Seoul and Tokyo and Singapore. She researched clients she wanted to approach. 2 weeks before the merger announcement, she received an email from Jun-Ho Park. He had tracked her down through her Northwestern alumni profile. Miss Song Hendrik, forgive the formality. We met briefly at Auberge Soleil in November. I am reaching out because our firm has been evaluating its U.S. advisory partnerships, and your name was suggested by a mutual contact in Seoul. If you have any interest in a preliminary conversation, I would welcome the opportunity. She stared at the email for a long time. Then she wrote back. She met Jun-Ho Park for coffee at a quiet hotel lobby in the Gold Coast. He was a composed man, careful with his words, and he looked at her with the slightly recalibrated attention of someone who had revised his initial assessment. I understand you may be transitioning professionally, he said. I am, she said. They spoke for an hour, in English and periodically in Korean, and at one point Jun-Ho Park set down his cup and looked at her directly. At that dinner in November, he said, you were on the balcony. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I found the evening uncomfortable, he said, with the careful understatement of a man who had spent a career, not saying exactly what he thought. I made a decision shortly after regarding the partnership with Hendrik Capital. I heard that it was delayed. Let's say I had concerns about the character of the leadership. He picked up his cup again. Those concerns have not resolved. Lyra nodded slowly. I'll have a proposal ready for you within 2 weeks, she said. A preliminary framework for what a cross-cultural advisory relationship might look like. He nodded. I look forward to it. She drove home through the city with the windows down, despite the February cold, and thought about her father teaching her to play chess, at the kitchen table in Seattle, and about her mother making mayok guk on Sunday mornings, and never letting her forget that she came from somewhere, was made of something, had a language that belonged entirely to her. She thought about how Caleb had looked at her at that November dinner, and seen decoration. She thought about what she had built in the 10 weeks since. The merger announcement came on a Thursday. Lyra saw it in the Wall Street Journal alert on her phone at 6:47 in the morning. She texted Philippa one word, now. The divorce papers were filed by noon. Caleb was served at his office at 2:15 in the afternoon. He called her 7 times in the following hour. She sent every call to voicemail and texted Philippa, who confirmed receipt and told Lyra to go somewhere comfortable and let her handle the next 72 hours. Lyra drove to Philippa's apartment, not her office. Philippa had made this offer weeks ago, and Lyra had not forgotten it. She brought a bag she had packed 3 days earlier and left in the trunk of her car. She sat in Philippa's kitchen while Philippa's cat walked across her feet, and she ate soup, and she did not cry. She had expected to cry, she had prepared for it. but what she felt instead was the particular quiet of a decision already made, a weight that had been held so long it had become simply part of the body, and now was gone. Caleb's response was initially furious, and then, when Philippa's team provided his attorneys with the full documentation, the commingled funds, the subsidiary, the forensic accounting report, the calendar records, the investigators' findings, the fury became something quieter and more frightened. His attorneys filed a motion arguing that Lyra had obtained evidence improperly, that she had accessed private documents without authorization. Philippa filed a 17-page response that walked through, in precise chronological order, every piece of evidence and the fully legal means by which it had been obtained: joint accounts, shared devices, publicly filed formation documents, licensed investigation. The motion was dismissed within a week. Caleb then attempted to argue that Lyra's founding member claim on Hendrick Capital was a misrepresentation, that her role in the LLC formation had been merely administrative, not substantive. Philippa produced emails from 2018 in which Caleb himself had described Lyra to a potential investor as my co-founder and strategic partner, and thanked her explicitly for her contributions to the early business model. He had written those words. He had simply assumed she would never need to use them against him. The merger process complicated things for Prescott Capital, which was required to disclose the pending litigation in its partnership documentation. Junho Park's firm withdrew from the merger entirely. 3 other institutional investors followed within a week, citing concerns about governance. The Hendrick Capital Board initiated an independent review of the subsidiary's financial records. Caleb, Lyra was told by Philippa, was not handling this well. She felt no satisfaction in that. She had long since stopped measuring her progress against his losses. She was measuring it against her own milestones. She moved into a furnished apartment in Lincoln Park while the legal process continued. She painted the kitchen a deep sage green the first weekend, a color Caleb had once said was too aggressive for interior walls. She bought a coffee maker she had wanted for 3 years and set it on the counter and made coffee every morning in the exact amount she wanted, at exactly the time she wanted, and drank it standing at the window watching the neighborhood wake up. She had started taking on clients by March, small engagements at first. A mid-size logistics company trying to negotiate a supply chain partnership in South Korea, a Chicago-based architecture firm preparing to pitch a project in Tokyo. She charged well and delivered precisely what she promised and asked for referrals only once she knew the work had been good. By April she had 4 clients. By June she had 9. She filed her LLC formation documents on a warm Tuesday morning, sitting at a table outside a coffee shop on Armitage Avenue. Song Consulting Group. She had gone back and forth on the name, her married name, her maiden name, something else entirely. She had chosen her maiden name on the morning she signed the papers, thinking about her mother's voice and her father's chess games, and the language she had carried for 30 years, without fully knowing what it was for. In May, the divorce settlement was finalized. The prenup was declared void by the court on the basis of documented marital misconduct. Lyra received her claim on the Hendrick Capital founding documents, calculated by a court-appointed financial expert at $11.2 million based on current valuation. She received her share of the marital estate. She received the car and a portion of the investment accounts she had co-managed for years. She did not receive the house. She had not wanted the house. She had told Philippa this months earlier, and Philippa had written it down without comment. Caleb walked out of the courthouse looking like a man who had survived something he had not expected to survive. He did not look at Lyra. She watched him go and felt, again, not triumph, not grief, just the clear flat feeling of a chapter ending. She had spent 6 years living in his story. She was writing a different one now. She called her mother that evening. Lyra ya, her mother said, using the Korean diminutive she had used since Lyra was 4 years old. It's done, Yama. A pause. Are you okay? I think so. I think I'm actually okay. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in Korean, your grandmother used to say that the ones who underestimate you are doing you a favor. They're handing you the element of surprise. Lyra laughed, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't expected to find for a while yet. Tell me about the business, her mother said, and Lyra did. The contract with Prescott Capital came through in August. Not a merger. Junho Park's firm had made clear they were no longer interested in Hendrick Capital, but a consulting engagement with Song Consulting Group, a 12-month partnership to support Prescott's expansion into the Midwest market, and to provide cross-cultural advisory for their existing American portfolio companies. It was the largest contract Lyra had signed. She printed it out, which she almost never did, and left it on her desk for the rest of the day, so she could look at it when she needed to remember that this was real. She hired her first full-time employee in September. Her second and third by November. She moved out of her apartment into a two-bedroom unit in the same building, using the second bedroom as an office while she scouted for proper commercial space. She ran into Caleb once, in October, at a client event downtown. He was there with a financial advisory firm she didn't recognize. Smaller than Hendrick Capital had been, and she had heard through her own network that he was rebuilding slowly, that the board had removed him from the CEO role following the governance review. He saw her across the room and she watched the sequence of things move across his face. Recognition. Calculation. A kind of assessment, the way you look at something you once owned and are trying to determine its current value. She met his gaze and did not look away first, and then she turned back to her conversation, because she had more interesting things to do than watch Caleb Hendrick figure out who she was. Later that evening, she had dinner with Philippa and Jun-Ho Park and two colleagues from Prescott Capital, and they talked for 3 hours about markets and language, and the specific texture of trust in cross-cultural business relationships. Jun-Ho Park said at one point, over dessert, that the best translators were never purely linguistic. They were people who understood what was at stake in the silence between words. That's what you do, he said to Lyra. You hear what's not being said. She thought about a balcony in November, and a champagne glass, and a man speaking Korean in a restaurant, where he believed no one who mattered was listening. I learned from a good teacher, she said, which made Philippa laugh because Philippa knew the whole story, and had chosen to interpret good teacher very charitably. The year ended quietly. Lyra sat in her apartment on the last night of December with a glass of wine and her laptop and her cat. She had adopted a cat in September, a gray one named Sue, which was the Korean word for water. And she looked at the spreadsheet of year one revenue for Song Consulting Group. She had built this from nothing, from a list on a laptop in an early morning kitchen, from a language she had carried since childhood and a set of skills that had been mistaken, for years, for scenery. She thought about the woman who had stood on that balcony in November with a trembling champagne glass, listening to her husband describe her to a stranger. That woman had been shattered, but she had been shattered in the way that certain materials shatter, not into dust, but into pieces that were still themselves, still intact, still capable of being reassembled into something with sharper edges. She sent her mother a message before midnight. Just 4 words, in Korean. I'm okay, I'm good. Her mother's reply came 30 seconds later. A single character, the Korean heart emoji, which Lyra had always found slightly absurd and now found, unexpectedly perfect. She closed her laptop and looked at the city outside her window. Chicago glittering in the cold the same way it always did. Indifferent and enormous and full of everything that hadn't happened yet. She raised her glass to no one in particular, and to herself, which amounted to the same thing.